Hey, Mike.
All right, we have, this is week 5, and today we'll be looking at some sites in the Jordan River Valley. There's Beit Shan and kind of well, it's below the Sea of Galilee. Oops, I need to share my screen. Otherwise you can't see what I'm doing there. Okay, there we go. All right, up here, Beit Shan. It's mostly well, it's both Old Testament and New Testament, even though it's not mentioned in the New Testament, but we'll get into that. It's all part of the Jordan River in between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. After Beit Shan, we'll travel down to Qasr el Yahud, which means Tower of the Jews, but it's the traditional place of baptism where Jesus was baptized. It's also the place where the Israelites supposedly crossed the Jordan River, or the tradition says it's probably accurate there. There's not too many places where they could cross. And then we'll look at Jericho, one of the oldest cities in the world. And in the area of Jericho, brief look at the Judean wilderness. That's the setting for the parable of the Good Samaritan. So we'll start with Beit Shan. Maybe you haven't heard of this city before, but Professor John Beck says, this site offers the most complete reconstruction of an ancient Roman city in Israel. This makes it the best place to understand the physical appearance of a New Testament era Decapolis city and to appreciate the way in which its design was meant to influence the way the locals thought about Roman culture and religion. It was not a Jewish city, but a Gentile city, the westernmost city of the Decapolis. Here in this aerial view, I show where it is. The city's 14 miles south of the Sea of Galilee, 2.5 miles west of the Jordan River, and 390 feet below sea level. The whole area is below sea level. And the old city was built on a hill for extra fortification. It's the tallest tell in Israel. It had a reliable source of water. You can kind of see a thin green strip there, the Herod Stream. And as you can see from this modern view, it had good farmland all around, all these straight lines and indicate fields that are now used for agriculture, both west of the Jordan River and east of the Jordan River, in the city or the state of Jordan. It's a big agricultural area, artificially irrigated because they don't get a lot of rainfall, but there is an abundant supply of irrigation. Up in one place there, you can see a round circle. That's irrigation circle. That's a good indication. You don't get a lot of rain, but you do have irrigation water. Now, the old city was at the top of the tell. It was quite small, had room for only 500 people or so. The modern city is sprawled much bigger than that. The Egyptians had an administrative center here. So we'll see some evidence of that a little bit. That suggests to me that the main trade route probably went through this area back then. Later, the trade route moved north, crossing the hills of Galilee. But one advantage of the trade route going through Beit Shan is that it's level ground. It's easy for chariots and other wheeled vehicles to go through. And it's near one of the places on the Jordan River where it's possible to cross the river, at least in the dry season. In flood stage, there's hardly anywhere where you could cross safely. But the trade route would be able to cross there, but it normally would go north to the Sea of Galilee first. Beit Shan is a Canaanite name. It means undisturbed house, or maybe house of safety, security, tranquility. I think that was a good advertising name, but the city didn't live up to that name very well. There are 20 different layers of destruction and rebuilding. So it wasn't that safe or secure or tranquil. Some of the destruction was caused by big earthquakes. Burma, you had asked a couple of weeks ago how often they happened. Apparently, they're roughly every 300 years or so, they have a big earthquake that causes destruction. And other destructions were from war of some sort.
Mike, being
yes.
below sea level, wouldn't it flood from the Jordan?
Not from the Jordan, no. Because the Jordan River would continue to, the water takes the path of least resistance, or where it can go down the furthest. And in this case, it goes furthest to the Dead Sea, which is even lower.
Okay.
If the Dead Sea ever filled up, then yeah, the whole valley would be flooded and flow out over the top of Beit Shan, but that would take a flood of biblical proportions. Yeah, and they've never had a flood for that reason. Place names starting with Beit or Beth mean house of something or another, and often it's a Canaanite god. But we don't know of any Canaanite god named Shan. And the Canaanite temple that we have found there was a temple to a god named Michael. Has no relation to Michael, my name. So you're not really sure how it got the name. Maybe they just thought it was way on top of the hill and it would be secure, therefore. But it doesn't always happen that way. So anyway, Egypt ruled the city for a while. After a while, they lost power. The Philistines moved in, later the Israelites, then Assyria, then Babylon, then Persia, and then Greece. By the time Greece came through, the city had outgrown the base, the small hill. So a larger city was built at the base of the tell. So there are essentially two archaeological sites here, an Old Testament one and a New Testament era site on the flatland below. Beit Shan is mentioned a few times in the Bible. In most translations, it's called Beth Shan. Now here's the tell. You can see a small amount on the top, how tall it is, steep, and over on the left, you can see the more recent, the Roman era ruins. But it does give a commanding view of the whole area. Now here, this is where it's mentioned in the Bible. Joshua 17:11, Beth Shan is mentioned as being part of the territory that was allotted to the tribe of Manasseh, within Issachar and Asher. Manasseh also had Beth Shan, Iblim, another city, the people of Dor, Endor, Tanakh, and Megiddo, together with their surrounding settlements. So that's just kind of a list of places that the tribe of Manasseh was given. But the problem was that the people didn't think they could take the area. The people of Joseph told Joshua, the hill country is not enough for us. We have too many people for that. We need space. But all the Canaanites who live in the plain have chariots fitted with iron, both in Beth Shan and its settlements, and those in the valley of Jezreel. So Joshua replied to them. So it turns out, Judges 127, Joshua told them they could take it if they tried, but they didn't. Judges 127, Manasseh did not drive out the people of Beth Shan, so it remained in Philistine hands, apparently, at that time. And it's mentioned again in 1 Chronicles 7:29. Again, it's just a kind of a place marker for where the tribe of Manasseh was. The next mention is in 1 Samuel. This King Saul was fighting against the Philistines on Mount Gilboa, which is about 3 miles west of Beth Shan. And Saul, this is the end of Saul's kingship. The Philistines killed Saul's sons. They wounded Saul, so Saul killed himself. The next day it says, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. So they cut off his head, stripped off his armor, and they sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news in the temple of their idols and among their people. They put his armor in the temple of Ashtoreths and fastened his body to the wall of Beth Shan. So apparently the Philistines controlled the city at that time. But the story doesn't end there. When the people of Jabesh Gilead heard about what the Philistines had done to Saul, all their valiant men marched through the night to Beth Shan. They took down the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall of Beth Shan and went to Jabesh, where they burned them. Now, see, many years earlier, in one of Saul's first actions as king, he saved the people of Jabesh from the Ammonites. Archaeologists aren't quite sure where Jabesh Gilead is now, but some say it's at a tell about 12 miles away on the other side of the Jordan River. Saul had saved their city, and they wanted to save him from the shame of being exposed on the city walls. So they came to get his body. Later, King David came and got his bones to give him a proper burial at his family tomb in the area of land of Benjamin. David went and took the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from the citizens of Jabesh Gilead. So that explains. So that there apparently David controlled the city of Beth Shan at that time. The last we hear of Beth Shan is in the time of King Solomon. 1 Kings 4 says that Solomon appointed governors over 12 districts in his kingdom. And as here, verse 12 says that Baana, son of Ahilud, was the governor in this region of Tanakh and Megiddo. But it doesn't say much about Beth Shan itself. And the Israelites apparently controlled it, but they may not have been the majority of the population. Let's look closer at the site, starting with the Old Testament city on top of the tell here. As you can see on the slide, this includes some remains from the early Bronze Age, probably Canaanite, before the Egyptians got there. And then there are some remains from the Egyptian era, the Egyptian governor's residence, before the Israelites got there. And there's some Israelite remains and some Roman era remains. When you first get to the top, the first thing you might notice is you get a great view up there. You know, it's 300 feet higher than the land around it. So this picture shows you looking east. You can see a bit of the Jordan River in the distance and the hills of Jordan beyond that. And looking west, you can see the ruins of the Roman city. We'll get to that in a little bit. On top of the tell, you'll see some ruins. These were exposed by archaeological work done in the 1920s. The goal back then was to strip the place down to bedrock, but they were in such a hurry that they threw away too much of the dirt. And later archaeologists sifted their dirt and found several good artifacts. Archaeology is done much more carefully now when they have time. About half the archaeological work in Israel is done as salvage, what they call salvage. They're investigating an area before they build on something on top of it. There's a rush to build a highway or some kind of building. So they have to do some pretty quick work.
Get out of here, Bino.
The population is growing so fast that they've got to build roads, apartments, factories, and it seems like everywhere you turn around in Israel, there's some kind of archaeological site. And of course, they've got so many that what would be fascinating for us is just kind of run of the mill for them. So some of their good good archaeological sites just kind of have to be paved over because they'll find something better somewhere else. They've got lots of other places to look. This area is part of a palace for an Egyptian administrator made out of mud brick, covered with this yellowish plaster. On the left is this large round stone. It's kind of a base for a pillar that helped hold up the roof. In the back corner is an Egyptian statue. We'll take a closer look at it in a moment. And on the right here is a stela, or a monument stone. And this is kind of a reconstruction showing what the palace would look like with, in a little better condition with better mud bricks. But you can see in the middle there, a fellow standing on one of the big round stones. And actually there's two round stones in the central room of this palace. And now that's shows you how thick the walls were. These thick walls would have made the palace a little bit cooler in the summer. And this man standing on the stone shows the kind of construction they had. A similar kind of construction was used by the Philistines for their temples. And Samson, at the end of Samson's work, he stood between two of those pillars that held up the roof, and he pushed the two pillars apart, and the whole building collapsed because he had pushed it apart. But this kind of construction shows you the kind of construction that Samson was working with at a different place. But it was the same kind of construction, the pillars in the middle of the room holding things up. This stela on the left shows an Egyptian worshiping his god, and on the right shows a kind of a clay mask that they used in their burials. That was in this case, it was this was probably a Canaanite figure, but the Canaanites had borrowed this style from the Egyptians. So these are some of the artifacts that have been found at Beth Shan. That shows the Egyptian influence in the area. This is some Canaanite artwork. This one on the left depicts a lion fighting something else. Some say it's a dog, some say it's a lioness. Either way, I think it is a pretty good artwork for the time, especially considering that it is made out of basalt, which is a very hard rock. So they were able to carve good artwork into this stone. On the right is a clay incense burner, pottery, perhaps used in worship, but perhaps just to make the place smell better. Lots of different sites have turned up similar incense burners. This one happens to have a snake running in and out of the holes just for decoration. These walls apparently date from the time of the Israelites. They're using some stones instead of just mud brick, but it's still pretty primitive in comparison to later stonework. The Israelite layer comes to an end at a destruction dated in the middle of the 8th century, about the time of the Assyrian invasion. So that's probably what it was, the demise of the Israelite era of Beth Shan. And the area at the top of the tell was mostly uninhabited for a long time. Now, Beth Shan is not mentioned in the New Testament, not even by it had a 1st century name, Scythopolis. We're not completely sure how it got the name Scythopolis. It might be named for a nomadic people from Scythia. That's in the area of southern Ukraine, southern Russia, Kazakhstan. They had served as mercenaries in one of the Greek armies, and they may have been given this area as a place to live. The name Scythopolis means Scythian city. But archaeologists haven't found anything that's distinctively Scythian there. It's a multicultural city, place for Greeks, Romans, Jews, later Muslims. Now it is, Scythopolis was the leading city of the Decapolis, a league of 10 Greek cities, and Decapolis is mentioned in the New Testament. In Matthew 4:25, it says, crowds of people from that area. The Decapolis was primarily Gentile, but it included some Jews. So both Jews and Gentiles could have been following Jesus. Mark 5:20, this was after Jesus had healed a demon-possessed man who lived in the tombs. So he healed him. The man went to, after he was healed, the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. This was probably in the area east of the Sea of Galilee, probably not Scythopolis. That's a different location than to where this man had lived. Mark 7:31 might include Scythopolis, this area of Beth Shan. It's because it just mentions the region of the Decapolis in general, but it was a pretty big region, so it's hard to know for sure whether Scythopolis or Beth Shan was meant in particular. This is a view of the lower city, the Roman era city. Although the lower city was started by the Greeks, it was developed by the Romans, including the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines. And the city was later conquered by Muslims in the 600s, but destroyed in a big earthquake in 749 and not inhabited since then or for a long time. So there were a lot of ruins just left there and not disturbed very much. You can see some pillars in the foreground that fell down in the earthquake. Some of the big pillars, we'll see some of those a little bit later too. And you can see some really big public areas. It was probably the marketplace, and along the side of the public areas were small rooms that would have been shops, something like that. Here they've put roofs over some of the shops. In the back is a big amphitheater that could have seated like 7,000 people. This is the amphitheater in reasonably good condition, at least the lower level. The top section of seats is completely gone. The middle section is pretty well ruined, but this bottom section of seats is still usable. And they still have people sit there, and they use this area for, addressing public groups. It has pretty good acoustics. Here's the main street. A lot of Greek cities had a main street called the Cardo. The row of stones in the middle, look different than the others. They cover up a drainage channel. They were designed to be able to be removed so that they could clean out that channel if they needed to. This gives you another view of the area. The main street here is also called Pilates Street because this mosaic on the floor says that somebody named Pilates had something to do with the street being here. Maybe he paid for it. Nearby, there is a hippodrome for racing horses and basic ruins of a Roman city. You can see the size of them there in comparison to the people. These were massive pillars. You would not want to be here at the time of the earthquake. So this would have been a carved ornamentation on the top of one of the pillars. This is an unusual find. All these pillars, all there, are made out of clay, and they were used to support a marble floor. And they forced hot air under the floor to heat the place. It was a first century sauna used in connection with a bathhouse. They would get hot, work up a sweat in here, and then they would go to the bathhouse to cool off or wash all that sweat off. This is a first century latrine. People would sit on the limestone slabs, and one leg on each slab. There was a small trough underneath it to take the waste away. And there was an aqueduct to bring water into the city and keep the water flowing, the waste flowing away. There's a small variety of smaller artifacts found here, such as this mosaic of the goddess Thiki, or Fate, on the left, and a woman on the right. These are funerary statues. Apparently, the custom at the time was to make a small statue that looked something like the person who died. And that's what you call a headstone. There's a statue and an oil lamp. The oil lamp has that curious mixture of a cross and a bull. So I'm not sure what kind of religion would have been represented by that lamp. Here's a mosaic from a floor of a synagogue from a later period, and some bowls found from the Muslim period. The Muslims would not make representations of animals, but they were great at making ornamental geometric designs and things like that. That's would have been 600s and 700s AD, shortly before the city was destroyed in the earthquake. But the archaeologists have found some bowls in very good condition. Any questions about Beth Shan?
Mike?
Yes.
Yeah, when we saw that photo of on the top of Beth Shan, there's one portion there it says Bronze Age. For us who are more into biblical history, we know more about, okay, that's Babylonian, okay, that's Persian, that's Greek, that's Roman. But when they put this Bronze Age, when is that? Is that during those days or before?
That was before the Israelites. In one part of the, I think it's 1 Samuel, talks about how the Philistines had iron, but the Israelites did not have iron. And so iron was in scarce supply, and the Philistines had a monopoly on all the blacksmithing. So if the Israelites wanted any of their iron tools sharpened, they had to go to the Philistines to get them sharpened. So this was right at the transition between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. The Israelites were still in the Bronze Age. The Philistines and Egyptians were in the Iron Age. So, and they will find some iron tools even for Israelite settlements. But yeah, Samuel explains, or maybe it's Judges, I forget which, but that they were made by the Philistines. They built blast furnaces buried in the ground. It's kind of a pretty primitive way of making iron, but at least it worked. They got some iron that way. So it's late Iron Age or late Bronze Age would be about the time when the Israelites left Egypt. So this Bronze Age at Beth Shan would have been the Egyptian era, when the Egyptians controlled that area. And at the end of the Bronze Age, there was a collapse of civilizations all across the Middle East. There was a lot of instability politically, and that is when the Philistines moved into the area. They were called the Sea Peoples, moving from Crete and other Greek islands over to the Asia. And there was people moving around. The pharaohs of Egypt had kind of lost power, and that's why they lost power over Beth Shan as well. It was the archaeologists are still trying to figure out what caused all this turmoil, political turmoil, military turmoil, changes of empires, houses and dynasties all over the place at the same time. And that is the same era when the Israelites left Egypt and came into the land of Canaan. That was a long answer, wasn't it?
During Moses' time, it's Bronze Age. And then probably during the kings, when Israel settled in the Promised Land, it's iron. You said iron before Babylonian age.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah, that's the change of periods. Yeah, but so this can be a transition between those eras. That like the Israelites did not have iron, but the Philistines did, or they didn't have iron, was very scarce in Israel, whereas the Philistines had more of it. So there's always going to be some kind of transitions between one age and another, where the wealthy have one kind of technology but the poor people don't. It makes archaeological dating somewhat difficult, and that happens, that's important when it comes to the dating of the destruction at the site of Jericho, which I'll come to a little bit later.
Makes you wonder,
Yes.
when did they start making glass?
Oh, they had some glass ornamentation, and
Mhm.
they made bottles early. I know the Romans had them, but as far as glass windows, that took a lot longer to develop.
Yeah, but you would
I
think,
don't know the dates on that. Glass would have been a great,
shield.
well, yeah, it would have been good cookware and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But yeah, they were still, all the Israelites used pottery. Glass was only for the wealthy at the time of the Romans, I think.
Hmm.
They would have discovered by accident that, if you build a fire in sand, it melts some of the sand and it becomes hard and crusty, but they didn't know how to work with that. It was a hotter temperature than they were used to working with.
Yeah.
Hi, Mike.
Yes, Cecilia.
Yeah, I couldn't help but wonder. It was really interesting listening to the when you explained the cities and the columns and the way the buildings were made. And I had to wonder, is there documentation about city planners? Because they had these things, I can, like with the columns in the middle to hold the building up. So I know they have to have a process of getting there. They tried different materials first and that didn't work. And then they finally,
Yeah.
it could be a comedy.
Yeah. There is a kind of an architectural history involved in how they figured out how to build things better. With better with it, starting with mud brick, and then later they used stones, and then at some point they learned how to make mortar, cement, and it's just different stages as they go along. And so the archaeologists can see the techniques that they used and kind of estimate the date from that, because once one person found a technology that worked, if it worked significantly better, it spread pretty quickly.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then the other thing I noticed, there are a lot of traditions or values that we have as human beings that have lasted, that have been, that are ancient actually. And to be really crude about it, like to use a crude example, the latrines. It's like at some point they realized they needed that, but they also decided that there needed to be a way of eliminating that waste. And I found myself wondering, okay, when did they come up with the walls for more privacy? Because that would have been a good year.
Yes, the Roman latrines didn't have much privacy.
They might have some wooden structure or leaves, or which of course will not stay as stone. It's possible they put some kind of
Right.
wooden.
Yeah. Of course, all the men were in one place and the women were in another. But yeah, but the baths weren't always segregated. That's a different thing too. And of course, they had statues of naked gods and goddesses all over the place, so everybody was quite aware of what people looked like without any clothes on.
You don't have to go farther away. When I went to summer camp in Orr, Minnesota, back in 1982, our men's restroom, there is no wall. You just sit on the bowl, and then you have a towel to cover your face. That's it.
It was also interesting, this concept of the wealthy probably had theirs made out of this material or the better material or the stronger material versus the poor. That's an old concept. It's really interesting how old that idea is. The idea that, the wealthy of whatever age it was there was always this distinction between the wealthy and the poor.
Right. That's why, yeah, some people wanted to lord it over others so they could have more stuff, so they could command more slaves to build them beautiful mosaic floors.
Mike, I'm surprised that the Egyptian, with all their technology, didn't have more of the ruins there than the other people.
Yeah, well, they didn't have a lot of room on top of the tell. If the city could only hold 500 people, they would have their top administrators there. But that might have been not much, much more than that. They had the big palace of the administrator, and he would have had a number of servants or slaves, and there wouldn't be a lot of room for the others. They'd have a military garrison, but a lot of the wealth of the city would have been for the farmers who worked the fields down below and weren't actually a part of the city.
I guess Cleopatra didn't go there, huh?
Well, maybe not. to go to the mud house in Canaan. Yeah. Mud worked pretty well in areas that don't get a lot of rain, but this area does get a fair bit of rain, but the mud brick is still fairly well preserved. But yeah, they once they figured out how to work with stones, yeah, that does work a whole lot better than mud brick. At least they plastered their mud bricks to make it to look nicer. They probably painted some walls too. Okay, let's look at the next place. We'll be traveling from Beit Shan about 50 miles south to Qasr el Yahud. I misspelled it on the map. It's Yahud instead of Yehud, but okay, close. Qasr el Yahud is Arabic for Tower of the Jews. The tower is actually part of a Greek monastery, a monastery of Saint John the Baptist. The reference to the Jews is because the Israelites crossed the river here. So that legend of the Jews crossing, the Israelites crossing into the land of Canaan at this point, that legend continued for millennia. We can see the story in the book of Joshua, chapter 3. When the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. This was in springtime. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap and a great distance away at a town called Adam. That's near the Sea of Galilee, in the vicinity of Zarethan. While the water flowing down to the Sea of to the Sea of the Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. It just continued flowing, so it went away. So the people crossed over the Jordan River opposite Jericho. Here's a couple illustrations there, one on the left by James Tissot, and one on the right by Gustave Doré. Some really ancient illustrations there. Another event that supposedly happened at this location was Elijah being taken up by a chariot of fire. And east on the other side of the Jordan River, there's a hill named the Hill of Elijah, where he supposedly went up. Now, this is the story in 2 Kings 2. As Elijah and Elisha were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared, separated the two of them. Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." And what that means, I'm not sure. Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his garment. Elisha took hold of his garment, tore it in two. Elisha picked up Elijah's cloak that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. And he used that cloak to cause the Jordan River to stop flowing, and so he could walk again over again. So that's one artist's illustration. Elijah went up on the east side of the Jordan. We'll be on the west side, the Israeli side. So we won't be there. There's really no way to prove where it all happened. It's just that, this site, Qasr el Yahud, is one of the best places to cross the Jordan River in the area of Jericho. But most tourists there are interested in something more recent, the baptism of Jesus. He was baptized by John the Baptizer. But where was that? The New Testament information gives us, the following. Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan River to be baptized by John. Well, that Jordan River is kind of long, so we really don't know where that was. John 1:28 tells us that it all happened at Bethany on the other side of the Jordan, the east side, where John the Baptizer was baptizing. The next day, John saw Jesus coming toward him and said, "Look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." Now, in John 3 says that John also baptized at another place, Aenon near Salem, but none of that helps us any because we're not really sure where any of these places are. The tradition says, comes to say that, this Qasr el Yahud is the place, this Bethany on the other side of the Jordan. But like the early church scholar Origen around the year 200 said, there's no such place. He didn't know of any place. He suggested the original text said Bethabara. So some Greek manuscripts have Bethabara in there, later manuscripts that apparently read what Origen said about it. And that's a name that means house of the river crossing. All right, well, that makes sense, at a place where there's a ford, but we still don't know exactly where that is. Anyway, the tradition says it's near the southern end of the Jordan River, east of Jericho. So here I've marked it on Google Maps. That's where we'll be going, this site, Qasr el Yahud. Now, the problem with this site is the chronology in the book of John. In John 1, verse 29, John saw Jesus coming toward him and said, "Look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." And verse 35, the next day, John was there again, and there were some disciples there. Verse 43, the next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. And in chapter 2, it says, on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana. So, and Jesus went to that wedding. So the problem is that there's 64 miles between Qasr el Yahud and Cana. At least 70 miles if you're walking. So some think that the actual site of baptism would have to be a lot further north, closer to the Sea of Galilee, or even north of the Sea of Galilee, either one. We don't know for sure, but on our tour, we are going to the southern site, to Qasr el Yahud, so that's what I will talk about today. The site is not particularly photogenic. It's set in the middle of a desert, but it's on the river. It's a place where you can go down to the Jordan River. And as you can see in the photo here, there are two walkways, one on one side of the river, the Israeli side, one on the Jordanian side. And the river isn't very big. And this is a dry season, so that's in late spring, there'd be a lot more water, and the water level would rise up to where these people are standing. So anyway, the people on this side have on special, they've purchased baptismal robes, kind of thin white cloth, but I'm not sure how much they cost, but apparently this whole group decided to do it. The ones on the other side of the river don't have those robes. Now, the biggest day of the year for this site is January 6th, the day on which many churches commemorate the baptism of Jesus. Now, this is some Greek Orthodox procession going down there on January 6th, the Epiphany. Now, notice the sign on the right. Danger, mines. this whole area is a minefield. The Israeli army put them there 50 years ago so terrorists wouldn't try to sneak across the border. So if you go off wandering by yourself, you should get baptized first because you might not come back. Now, the whole area is a military zone and the monasteries are empty and they might be booby-trapped with explosives. It's kind of a reminder of the world as it is now and the reason we look for a better one. Any comments or questions about the baptismal site? Yeah, well, people stay on the path, and I think that's what the soldiers are there for, to make sure that people stay on the path. All right. From
Pastor Mike, I remember the
yes.
what you call this? One of my classmates. He said that he had a tour in Israel, and they were up the hill, right? And he and his friends said, "Hey, why are we going, all zigzagging with the trail? Why don't we just go straight down, straight down?" And then what you call this? The guy said, "Don't go where there are mines over there, you might die. So just follow the beaten path, wherever you are in Israel," he said, "follow the beaten path. Don't go astray. There might be mines." That's interesting.
Yeah, that's right. That's the reality of Israel. And of course, Jericho and this area is all part of occupied Palestine. They still have not, they don't have a peace treaty. So there's still tension there. All right. Let's share a screen again. From Qasr El Yahud, we'll go 7 miles west to the site of ancient Jericho. And as you can see in the satellite photo here, Jericho is kind of this oasis of green in this middle of this really desolate desert. The area only gets 4-8 inches of rain a year, but there are some good springs here. This word Ain is Arabic word meaning spring. And it's a big spring, and it enables the area to be irrigated and to have good agriculture. And one of the things that they have planted a lot of are date palms. So the city of Jericho is also called the City of Palms. Now, some say that Jericho is the oldest inhabited city on earth. It dates back well before the time of Abraham. In ancient times, it might have had 2,000 people. Today, about 20,000 people live there, mostly Palestinians. And it is at 825 feet below sea level. The Dead Sea is like 1,400 feet below sea level. So the Jordan River still descends quite a bit. The name Jordan means descending, descender, because the Jordan River drops a lot in elevation as it goes down. But here, this is below sea level. That means it doesn't get much rain, and it also means it is really hot in summertime. It's comfortable in winter. So Herod built his winter palace here, but there's no way he was going to stay here in the summer. He'd go up to the top of the mountain on Jerusalem for the summer. It was a bit cooler there, or the seacoast, Caesarea, where it was cooler again. Now, so this is, it was originally, the Arabs called it Tel El Sultan, kind of like named after the spring, but the Israelis call it Tel Jericho. It's not very big from the air. It looks kind of like a dump. There are heaps of dirt and some pits, but archaeologists are pretty interested in those pits and those heap of dirt. One of the most interesting things they found was this round structure. It was a tower of some sort when the ground level was a lot lower. And they find it interesting mainly because of its age. It's thought to be the oldest stone tower in the world. However, they have found an older one in Syria, but it's still a very ancient one. And it doesn't seem to have been used as a defensive tower, like a military defense for defending the city. Was inside the wall. So, it's not very good for defense. And so their figure must have some kind of ceremonial or, ritual religious function, perhaps. The archaeologists date the tower at about 7,500 BC, something like that, back before pottery was invented. That's pretty old. The one odd thing about this culture is that they removed the skulls of dead people and covered them with clay to make them kind of look like the people did when they were alive. And they would keep these skulls, these heads, in their homes. It's kind of some way to honor their ancestors or say what family they were part of. And because they've found a few of those as they've dug up. This is a good example of a mud brick and stone walls. The stone wall seems to be in the background. Next, that stone wall is a kind of a retaining wall for the city wall. This was late Bronze Age, about 1550 BC, before the Israelites got there. And the city was destroyed then and burned. And the archaeologists say that it was not occupied again for a long time. So the archaeologists, some archaeologists say, most of them say, that when Joshua came through, Jericho had already been destroyed. So, but other archaeologists say the dating is wrong, that they have misdated things, based on some pottery that was, that they found, and anyway, it's contested. So those who want to defend the accuracy of the biblical timing of the story will use point to one set of evidence, and the other archaeologists point to the others. So, but some, will say that Jericho was already a heap of ruins before Joshua got there. There was nothing for them to fall down. But anyway, that is the biblical interest in Jericho. It enters the story in Numbers. Well, this shows a good contrast between the mud brick wall and the stone wall. So here's what the Bible says about Jericho. In Numbers chapter 22, the Israelites traveled to the plains of Moab, camped along the Jordan River across from Jericho. So they were still on the other side. And there Moses climbed Mount Nebo, and he died on the top of Mount Nebo, and nobody knows where he is buried to this day. There's not even any legends about that. But so Joshua sent some spies to go seek out from where they camped at Shittim. He says, go look over the land, especially Jericho. So the two spies went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab, and they stayed there. And the king of Jericho wanted to find these spies. He heard they were coming, so he told Rahab to bring them out. But Rahab said, no. Well, Rahab had hidden them in some flax on top of her roof. So, because she was in favor of the Israelites. She had heard about how God was with them. So she wanted to be on the right side. So she hid them and sent the king of Jericho on a wild goose chase. She let the Israelite spies down from her window and a rope. Now, this artist rendition shows massive stone blocks, but no, that is archaeologically incorrect. The Canaanites, in fact, nobody at the time knew how to work with stone blocks or in the area. The Egyptian pyramids probably had stones this big, but nobody in Canaan did at that time. They had more field stones that weren't shaped and fashioned like this. So anyway, so Joshua they cross, and the Israelites cross the river. They come to Jericho, and they send their priests to march around it. Once every, for 7 days they marched around it once. On the seventh day, they marched around it 7 times and blew their trumpets, and the walls of Jericho fell down. So that's all artist renditions you have to take with a grain of salt. So after Jericho fell, Joshua pronounced a curse on anybody who decided to rebuild the city. And several centuries later, somebody did indeed try to rebuild it. Hiel of Bethel rebuilt Jericho, the walls and the gates. And indeed, the curse that Joshua had pronounced came true for him, which not a very good thing. But so it was rebuilt by the Israelites. It was destroyed by the Babylonians when they took over. Later, the area was repopulated by, because it's a good area, and repopulated by Greeks and then later Romans. This is part of King Herod's palace. And he used a different technique of stonework that was commonly used in Rome, but almost never anywhere in the land of Israel. And they suspect that he probably imported bricklayers from Rome to build this palace for him. This is part of his bath, the bath works or swimming pool. He had a big swimming pool where some of his rivals, some people he didn't like, accidentally drowned. But anyway, he had a nice swimming pool there. New Testament era, we find Jesus doing a couple things in Jericho. One, as he healed a blind man. As Matthew 20 says, as they were leaving Jericho. Luke 18 says, as they approached Jericho, as they were going in. So we're not quite sure how to reconcile the two little differences there. But the point was that Jesus, well, there's 2 points there. The blind man was calling Jesus, son of David. So the blind man was recognizing some truth about Jesus that other people weren't seeing. The blind man could see more than they did, but he healed his blindness, and then he followed him. Now here's a modern reconstruction of it. Another incident in Jericho was the story of Zacchaeus. As Jesus was going through, Zacchaeus, a short man, a tax collector, wanted to see Jesus, so he climbed into a sycamore fig tree. And then here, this artist was from Africa, so set the scene with African peoples. That's probably just as accurate as setting the scene with North European peoples. They're all artists' renditions. So that incident happened in the city of Jericho. Another mention of Jericho comes in the story of the Good Samaritan. And I discussed that a little bit in a sermon a couple of weeks ago. And the road from Jericho to Jerusalem travels through some pretty desolate areas. This is part of the road. Oops, this is out of place. This is a Muslim palace in Jericho. Really nice looking mosaic floors. This was a much nicer palace than what Herod had. But the Muslims were great with their architecture. Muslims were the inventors of algebra, and they were the leaders in science and math at the time. This is more of the scene where the road between Jericho and Jerusalem went through the middle of this ravine. Some Greek Orthodox people have built a monastery on the side of the cliff there, but it is a pretty steep, barren ravine, and the area around it is even more desolate than the ravine. It's not a good place to have your get mugged. This is This is from Google Street View. They do have a modern road going through the area, so I was able to get some photos there. But yeah, it shows how desolate the area is. It just doesn't get much rain, and whatever rain it does get just flows off pretty quickly. There's nothing to stop it. There's a little bitty bush growing there, but most of it's not. And if I see a few scattered small bushes, but it's pretty bleak. That's called the wilderness of Judea. And that's it for today. Any questions?
Thank you, Pastor Mike. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very
Yeah, Mike.
much.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care,
Bye, guys.
everyone.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you
Great
Sunday,
Bible
most of you on Sunday. All right. Have a blessed week.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.